Hi stamping and crafting friends. Welcome to Melissa's Crafting Treehouse.
Hello my crafting friends. Welcome to Melissa's Crafting Treehouse. Today I'm going to be sharing a colorful fall themed project with a beautiful simple background that can be created with a variety of coloring tools. I'll be talking about these various methods and showing two different results in my fall color scheme. I love how these both turned out and I hope you do too. So let's dive in.
This is one of 3 current Stamp Club projects. Stamp Club members get a free class to go every other month, complete with project kits in the mail to make 2 each of 3 different designs. Club members also get free Stampin' Up! Products from me at the end of the club cycle. Plus, you can sign up anytime to join a club. For details about my online Stampers Club program, make sure to check out the link in the video description below. For this project, we'll be using the Gorgeous Leaves stamp set. Now you can buy this stamp set on its own, or you can buy it as a part of a bundle with these beautiful intricate leaves dies. For today's project, we'll only be using the stamp set. Now I'll also be using this Lovely Labels Pick-a-Punch for the sentiment piece on this card. For club members who get a kit in the mail, I have punched the ends of this piece for you. But I want to just show you how to use that punch for those of you who are not receiving a kit in the mail.
I always turn it over and look at the bottom to see that I'm punching it in the center. And then the other side is it's going to be a little bit small, so you could put a handle on it too, just by attaching a piece of cardstock at the end, and then you'd have something to slide it in and have something to hold on to. So we'll start with the card body and just folding it in half. Burnish at the edge. And then for this, I'm just going to use this big old splotchy image in the set and stamp repeatedly on the sides. So it'll just give it some texture in the background. And I'm going to do some full ink and some second ink. I really love this. I love textural images anyway, but this one is especially fun. So Cherry Cobbler ink on Cherry Cobbler cardstock. Let's go ahead and stamp the sentiment piece. I've got one that's already finished. And I'm going to do that in Cherry Cobbler as well. Now, and the thank you is from the Nature's Harvest. Now, one little tip is when you're doing white on white, it's really hard to see the outline of the piece of cardstock, so I like to take a colored piece and just place it underneath. And then it's just easier to see where you're stamping. So then I'm just going to take my little piece of pumpkin pie and some glue dots, and I'm going to put a glue dot in the center on the back, so 2 of them maybe. So it's just going to stick out a little bit on either side. Should be centered on the flat part of what's punched. And then that I'm going to put dimensionals on the back side. Yeah. All right. So I've got all of my simple boring parts out of the way. Now let's get to the fun. So to do this technique, you need to do the technique first because it's alcohol, which means that the color might stick to what's heat embossed if you do the heat embossing first. So we have to do the alcohol portion first. Now, the way that I like to do this is with alcohol markers. But I know a lot of people are not going to necessarily have alcohol markers. So if you don't, there are some alternatives. The one I've actually finished is done with ink pads instead. So you can take ink pads and just rub them right onto the vellum and use alcohol. So we're going to start with just doing little kind of splotches of color of all 3 colors. That's Cherry Cobbler. And this is Pumpkin Pie. And last but not least, my Old Olive. Now, this is fall, right? So some of these colors, when they mix, might kind of get a little muddy because like a green and a red, when they mix, will probably turn into a brown. But it's fall, so I think it's probably gonna be okay. So what I'm gonna do next is I've got a little, just any spare container. I usually use 91% alcohol, and that's, that's what I have the most of. Used a lot of it, but I decided to buy some 99% on Amazon this week just to see what it does. I think the higher the alcohol content, the better, as far as the reaction you get. And when you're using alcohol marker, you're starting with some alcohol in the ink, right? But when you're starting with ink pads, there's no alcohol in it. I figured it might be better to have a higher alcohol content in the alcohol itself, which would help. So I'm just gonna pour a little bit into my little, container. It doesn't really matter what container you use. It will evaporate. So if you let it sit there, within, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes, it'll be all gone. And then we're gonna grab a water painter. There's different sizes, it doesn't really matter what size you use. You're not gonna squeeze it, ever, okay? There is some water like in this one, but you don't need to worry about it. Just don't squeeze it and you won't have to worry about the water. What we're doing is we're gonna go into this little well of alcohol, and one color at a time, we're gonna go over these colors. Now, I think I'll start with the red first and do all the reds, so I'm trying not to mix the colors too much. And then I'm gonna do my orange, because my orange is close to the red, closer to the red than the green. And the colors just kind of start mixing. And then I'm just gonna wipe it off a little bit. This is where, if you use the water in the well, it'll clean it out a little bit. Okay, now I'm gonna go do my green. I don't want to have it any orange or red in there when I start with the green, just to minimize the mixing. And you can see I'm getting a little bit of color in there, but it's such a small amount that it's no big deal. And then I'm just gonna go into my greens. You can see some of the greens already sort of bled into it already. Now, you're gonna notice as I do this that the colors are not as strong or brilliant as when I use the ink pads, because they basically have more color from an ink pad on the vellum than I would from using the markers. So I'm just gonna do a little bit more, and it'll evaporate on here and dry pretty quickly as well. You can actually grab your heat tool and on a low setting and dry it a little bit if you want. But on the paper, it looks really pretty. You could do it on the paper instead of on one of these. That way you'll be able to tell a little bit better what it's gonna look like in the end. And then the next thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna use my little eyedropper, squeeze up a little, and I can just tap it. And you can see I'm getting this nice little bit of texture there with the droplets. So you can do that as much as little as you want. And then you can also just kind of flick it if you want it to be a little bit less strong as far as the size of the dots, or take your brush and flick it. Let's see if we can get some smaller little specks of shape in there. So I'm going to use this, which is something we sold many years ago. It basically blows air. So I'm going to put that right there, blowing air onto the tip of my marker, and it's going to give me some like specks on my piece. We could also probably get a paintbrush. See that there's tiny little specks coming out of there, and that, just adds yet another sort of element of texture. I could also use a re-inker with my paintbrush if I want to have stronger splotches of color. So let's try that. I'll just take a little block, put some color on there. I could also use my re-inker, of course, and then put my brush in. See if we get some bigger specks of color. Just keep in mind, it can splatter. So if you're wearing something white that you're worried about getting color on, cover yourself or don't do it. Okay, so let's see if we can get a little bit more in the way of some specks here. Yeah, so now I'm getting some stronger specks of red, and I kind of like that. I chose the right shirt today because it's nice and dark. So you can play with it as much as you want. So you can see I got specks over here even though I was not even anywhere near there. So just keep that in mind when you make your choice. So now we're gonna let that dry. Okay, so we're just gonna dry that. Okay. So now, just to compare these two for a second, you can see, of course, they both have white behind them. This is much, much darker because I basically took my ink pads and rubbed them in lines on my vellum. And then I did the same thing with the alcohol and the water painter. So it's much darker. So if you want a darker look, you can, play with the ink pads. The only caution with that is you do have to be careful not to touch the ink pad color. That. And then you can also, use these kinds of markers in the same way that I used the alcohol markers. You won't get probably as much color. It'll probably be something in between this level of color and that level of color. So it's sort of an intermediary option to use the regular markers. And I'm pulling them out mostly because I'm sure that people have a variety of things at home. Yeah. So, Magic Embossing Buddy. Okay, so I've tapped it with my embossing buddy, and then I'm just going to do a couple of leaves. I kind of did them sort of with the idea of like they're falling-ish. And as you can see, you can't see what I stamped. So generally up in that area, generally in the middle, angled in a different way. I kind of wanted to make sure I had room for my sentiment off here to the right without it. All right, so now I got my white embossing powder here. And there we go. I'm probably got a few little specks in various places, but this is a pretty kind of flexible background, right? If there are a few extra specks, no big deal, right? So back to my heat tool. And this, of course, I'm doing on my high setting. I'm going to hold it down with something so it doesn't blow every which way. And then I'm going to show you how to assemble this. So, super soft look there, right? I mean, it's such a completely different look from the first one. And pretty, right, in its own right. Now, I don't know if you guys can see on camera, I have the clear ones in there too. The next thing we're gonna do is attach the vellum to the white. And what I've given you is an adhesive sheet to use. They come in a pack of, 12? Yeah, 12. And I have this pack here is almost gone, but it's only because I pretty much cut for the class, but it'll last you forever if you buy any of those. And they come in handy for all kinds of things. What I'm going to use it here for is I'm going to put it right in the middle. You can see I've left a buffer on the left and the right, and just a little bit on the top and bottom, so it's not too close. And I'm just going to peel back one of the sides. So it basically has two sides to it. And this is the hardest part, is just getting it started. And you don't want to touch that portion there, because that's where the adhesive is, right? If I touch it, it's going to stick to my finger. So you want to pull it off carefully and then get it started. And then what I like to do is only do part of it and then lay it down so it's centered. And then I'm going to go ahead and start it again. So now that's on there, centered in there. So now I'm just going to go ahead and remove the second layer. It leaves the adhesive on there, so you can see the adhesive on there. And I also like to do this in segments intentionally. So I'm going to go ahead and fold that back. And get my placement in the center. Once you put it down, you're kind of committed. The glue dots are definitely easier, I'll just say that. So I'm just centering it side to side and laying it down. Second piece, and then we'll take off the third one. So, this is a little fussy doing it this way, but it just depends on how much you want it to lay flat or if you want it to have sort of that the raised edges. So there's the finished piece. And then it's just a matter of assembly. So I'm going to just take my pieces. This is attached flat on here. And then this is attached on there. And we're good to go. So that's it. So there's basically the two finished versions.
Here are a few class participants making their projects. Roseanne was using the Blends Alcohols markers in the 3 colors. Sue decided to use ink pads, and in this case we added the crushed curry ink as well. And then Sarah decided to use markers, and she used all 4 colors as well, including the crushed curry. As a reminder, this is one of 3 of the current Stampers Club projects. If you'd like to receive free classes to go in the mail, plus free Stampin' Up! Products, you may want to join my online Stampers Club. To learn more, click on the little I in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, or click on the link in the video description below. I hope you enjoyed my project today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and happy crafting!